This property is functionally part of our community, Mr. Renner, and the lien stands until you bring it into compliance. That was Paula Voss, president of the Cedar Hollow Homeowners Association, for 9 years, standing on my gravel drive in white sneakers, reading off a clipboard a number she had invented for a fence that sat 30 feet outside her boundary. She had filed a lien against my home that morning. What she did not know was that the title company stamping her paperwork, the one that ran every closing and every lien search in our county, was a business that could be bought, and that I had spent my whole working life learning exactly how a clean chain of title beats a loud claim every single time. So what would you have done, standing on your own land, holding a notice that said you owed money you did not owe, on a structure she had no right to touch? My name is Carl Renner. I was 61 years old that spring, and for 34 years before I retired. I had been a title examiner, and then a title officer, the person who reads the old deeds and the survey plats and the recorded easements and decides whether a piece of property can change hands cleanly. I started at a 2-room abstract office, the year I turned 27, with a magnifying loupe and a roll of microfilm, and a senior examiner named Walt, who used to say that every lie in real estate is just a document somebody hoped nobody would read. I read them. That was the whole job. I read the thing nobody else wanted to read, the spidery cursive on a 1,940 seconds deed, the meets and bounds that referenced a fence post and a white oak that had been gone for 60 years, the easement buried 4 conveyances back that changed who owned the right to a driveway. I closed thousands of sales. I knew what a lien was worth and what it was not worth. I knew that a piece of paper recorded against a house is only as strong as the chain it sits on, and a chain is only as strong as the records behind it. My wife, Diane, had picked our place with me 11 years back. We had driven out on a Sunday in October to look at a different property entirely. A tidy ranch house inside a subdivision with a paved cul-de-sac, and she had taken one look at the identical mailboxes and said, "No, keep driving." The county road turned to gravel and then dead-ended at 6 acres that nobody had wanted, a sagging farmhouse, a creek along the back, and a stand of black walnut that turned the whole western like gold that afternoon. She got out of the truck and walked straight to the biggest trunk and put her hand on it and did not say anything for a while. Then she said, "This one. We bought it that month." The parcel sat well outside the platted lines of Cedar Hollow, carved off an old farm 2 decades before the subdivision was a line on anybody's map. And that fact, the boring legal fact of where the line ran, would turn out to be the thing that saved us. Diane died of a stroke 2 winters before any of this started. She was 58. Our daughter, Tess, was 16 that spring, a quiet, watchful girl with her mother's habit of going still before she said the true thing, and she still slept in the room that looked out at Diane's walnut trees. I want to be plain about the geography because the geography is the whole case. Cedar Hollow was a subdivision that a developer platted in the late 90s on the flat ground east of the creek. My 6 acres sat west of the creek, on a parcel that had been carved off a farm in 1974, 2 decades before the subdivision existed. My deed referenced that original farm survey. My driveway came off the county road, not off any street the association maintained. I paid the county for my road, the county for my water table, and I had never signed a covenant, never bought into the plat, never owed the association a dime. None of that mattered to Paula Voss because she had decided that the view from the eastern lots included my walnut trees, and that meant in her words that my land was within the community's aesthetic interest. The fence was where it began. I had built a 4-foot field fence along my own western property line to keep the neighbors' cattle off my creek bank, and I had built it exactly on the line my survey showed, with a licensed surveyor present and a stamped plat to prove it. I had hired the surveyor on purpose, the way a man who has read 10,000 boundary disputes hires a surveyor, so that there would be a stamped record of the line before there was ever an argument about it. We walked the whole western edge together on a cold morning, the surveyor and I, and he set his pins and shot his line and handed me a plat that put my fence 11 inches inside my own ground, which is exactly where I wanted it. 3 days after I finished setting the last post, a letter arrived. It came in a heavy cream envelope with the association's little pine tree logo embossed on the flap, the kind of envelope that is supposed to make you nervous before you open it. The letter said the fence violated the association's uniform boundary standard, and that I had 30 days to remove it or face a fine of $50 a day. I read it twice, standing at the kitchen counter, and then I set it down and looked out the window at a fence that sat 30 feet on my side of any line that had ever been recorded, anywhere. Then I drove to the county recorder's office. I knew the building well, the worn marble steps, the long oak counter, the smell of old paper and toner. The clerk, a woman named Brenda, who had worked the counter for 20 years and knew me from my working days, pulled my file without my even asking which one. I laid my own deed and the subdivision plat side by side on the counter, and I traced the line for her with my finger, the way I had traced 1,000 lines for 1,000 buyers. And I confirmed what I already knew in my bones. My parcel was not in the plat. The legal description of Cedar Hollow began at a monument east of the creek and closed back on itself east of the creek, and it never once crossed the water. The association had no recorded authority over 1 inch of my ground. Brenda looked at the 2 documents and then looked at me and said, "They sending you letters, Carl?" I told her they were. She made me a certified copy of both, stamped and sealed, and slid them across the counter, and would not take my dollar for the copies. "Put that in your file," she said. She knew me well enough to know I had one. I could have ignored it. A lot of men would have, but I had spent 34 years watching what happens to people who ignore a piece of paper instead of answering it. So I did what I had always done at the office. I started a folder. A plain manila folder, labeled with the date in pencil, in the upper right corner. And into it went the letter, the certified copy of my deed, the certified copy of the plat, and a 1-page memo in my own hand, stating the facts in order, dated and signed. Then I drove out to the association's little office beside the front gate. It was a converted guard shack with a window air conditioner and a vinyl banner out front that read, "Cedar Hollow, a community of standards." Paula Voss was inside at a desk too large for the room, in a linen blazer and white sneakers, with a coffee mug that said "World's Okayest President," which I think was meant to be a joke and was not. I handed her the written response, polite and short, explaining that my property lay outside her plat and that I would not be removing a lawful fence on my own land. She did not read it. She took it between 2 fingers like it might be sticky and set it on the corner of the desk on top of a stack of flyers for a community yard sale. "Everyone west of the creek thinks the rules do not apply to them," she said, not looking up from whatever she was writing. "They apply. You will see." That was the first time I heard her say it. I drove home and wrote the date and the sentence in the log, word for word, and slid it into the folder behind the first tab. I did not know yet that I would fill 3 more folders before it was over, or that the sentence would matter in a county hearing room 2 years later. I only knew that a woman who had not read my deed had just told me the rules applied, and that she had no idea what the rules actually were. Let me tell you the thing that took me a while to understand, because I want you to see it the way I came to see it. Paula Voss was not really fighting about a fence. Her husband, Greg Voss, ran a development company, and that company had an option on the 40 acres directly behind Cedar Hollow, the flat ground that ran right up to the east bank of my creek. To build the next phase of houses there, the kind with creek views, that sell for a premium, he needed two things. He needed the creek to read as a community amenity, a shared water feature, and he needed the wooded west bank, my bank, to stay wooded and clean as a backdrop. He could not buy my 6 acres because I would not sell. So his wife, wearing the volunteer hat of an association president, set out to bring my land under the association's thumb, one citation at a time, until the day they could point to a file full of violations and a lien and argue that my parcel was functionally part of the community already. I did not know all of that on the day of the fence. I learned it the way you learn anything real, one document at a time. The fine notices started arriving every week. $50 a day, the letters said, compounding. By the end of the first summer, the letters claimed I owed $4,500. I paid none of it because I owed none of it, and every letter went into the folder behind a tab. I photographed each envelope, postmark and all. I kept a legal pad by the door and logged every contact. Tess used to tease me about it. She would come in from school and see me at the kitchen table with the folder open and say, "Adding to the binder, Dad," and I would say, "Always," and she would roll her eyes and get a snack. But she watched. Kids watch more than you think. That fall, the association escalated, and this is where the staircase really started to climb. In October, a man showed up at my gate in a polo shirt and a lanyard with a laminated card that said, "Community Compliance Inspector." He had a clipboard, a tape measure on his belt, and an air of authority he had bought somewhere online. He had parked his car halfway up my drive, past the posted sign, and was already photographing my outbuildings when I came out. I asked him what he thought he was doing on my property. He told me in the flat voice of a man reading a script that he was there to inspect my structures for code compliance. "Under the association's standards, which government body licensed you?" I asked him. He looked at his clipboard as if the answer might be on it. It was not. "The association retains me," he said. "That is not a license. Show me your inspection authority in writing." He did not have it. I asked him to name the statute that gave a private association the power to inspect a parcel outside its plat. He could not, because there is none. I told him he was standing on private property 30 feet outside the association's recorded boundary, that the sign he had driven past said exactly that, and that he needed to leave. Then I walked him back to his car with my phone up and recording the whole exchange. His face, his lanyard, his admission that no one had licensed him. All of it. He kept saying I would be hearing from the association. I kept walking. That footage went on to 2 drives that night. One in the house and one in a lockbox in my truck. The way Doyle would later tell me to do it, except I was already doing it because I had been doing it my whole life. That was incident number, and I am being precise here. Incident number 7 in the log I had learned to count. The next spring, a deputy rolled up my drive. I want to be careful how I describe this, because the deputy was not the problem, and I have never believed the deputy was the problem. His name was Sam Doyle, and he was a square, patient man, about 40, who clearly did not want to be there. He got out slow, looked at my posted sign, looked at the fence, and took his hat off before he said a word, which told me what kind of man he was. He told me the association had filed a complaint that I was operating an unpermitted commercial fence business on residential land, which was nonsense, and he half smiled when he said it, because we both knew it was nonsense. Then he explained something to me that I already half knew, and that I want you to hear clearly, because it is the part most people get wrong. A filed complaint has to be looked into. It does not matter if it is garbage. The officer has to roll on it, write it up and close it, or the complainant just files again and says the county ignored them. Doyle walked the fence line with me, looked at the stamped survey pins and shook his head. I can see the line same as you can, he said, but me seeing it does not make it go away. She is going to keep filing, and I am going to keep having to drive out here. He told me the only thing that would end the pattern was a pattern of my own. A documented record, clean enough and complete enough that the next time anyone with real authority looked, they would see the truth in one glance. He stood by his truck a minute before he left, turning his hat in his hands. "Keep doing what you are doing," he said. "Write it all down. Save it twice. The day this lands somewhere that matters, your file is going to be the only thing in the room that is true." Then he wrote his report, noted in plain language that he found no commercial activity of any kind on the property, signed it, and left. I requested a copy of that report through the county the following week, and it went in the folder behind its own tab. Incident 11. By the second summer, the letters had become a lawsuit. The association sued me in civil court to enforce its standards and to collect the fines it claimed I owed, which had ballooned past $11,000 on paper. I hired a local attorney, a calm woman named Ruth Park, who had handled property disputes for 20 years out of a storefront office above a hardware store, with boxes of old case files stacked to the ceiling and a window unit that rattled. The first thing she did when I set my folder on her desk was open it. And then she went quiet for a long minute, turning the tabbed sections one at a time. The certified deed, the stamped survey, the photographed postmarks and date order, the typed log, the recording of the fake inspector queued up on a labeled drive. She closed it and set her hand flat on the cover. "You kept all of this," she said. It was not quite a question. I told her I kept all of it. She said most clients came to her with a shoebox of feelings and a story they had told themselves so many times it had stopped matching the dates. I had come to her with a chain of title, a stamped survey, a postmarked record of every contact, and a recording of a man admitting on tape that no one had ever licensed him. She filed a motion to dismiss on the simplest possible ground that the association had no jurisdiction over a parcel that was not in its plat, and she attached my deed and the recorder's certified copy of the subdivision boundary. "This should be a half-day matter," she told me. "The line is the line. They cannot fine you for a fence in a county. They do not govern." The motion should have ended it. It did not, and the reason it did not is the reason this whole story exists. When Ruth pulled the title work the county relied on, the lien search, the boundary opinion, the plat certification, every piece of it carried the same stamp. Hollowbrook Title and Abstract. One company did the title work for the developer, for the association, for the county's routine closings, for everybody who bought or sold or borrowed against a home in those hills. And Hollowbrook's certified boundary opinion, the one sitting in the court file, had quietly redrawn the line. It described the creek as the western boundary of the Cedar Hollow plat, which would have swept my walnut trees and half my pasture inside the association's reach. It was wrong. It contradicted the original 1974 farm survey, and my recorded deed, and the meets and bounds I had traced with my own finger on Brenda's counter. But it was the official-looking document in the file, stamped by the company. Everyone in the county trusted, and as long as it stood, Paula Voss had a piece of paper that looked as real as mine. Ruth slid it across the desk to me, and watched my face. "You used to do this work," she said. "Tell me what I am looking at." I looked at it for a long time. Then I told her I was looking at a lie with a stamp on it, and that I knew the company that owned the stamp. I sat in Ruth's office. I felt the old, cold clarity come over me, the feeling I used to get at the title desk when a file that looked clean turned out to have a crack in it. I knew Hollowbrook. I had worked across the table from them for 30 years, traded files with them, argued boundary opinions with their old founder. Over the phone, a stubborn, decent man named Earl Hollowbrook, who believed a title opinion was a promise. I knew Earl had died of cancer the winter before, that his daughter lived 3 states away and had no interest in running an abstract shop, and that the place had shrunk to 3 people in a strip mall office carrying more professional liability. I knew, because reading the financial health of title companies had been my literal job for 3 decades, that Hollowbrook was for sale, and had been quietly for sale for over a year, with no buyers, because nobody wants to inherit another firm's liability. Here is the part I will not dress up, because the niche I am telling this in rewards, plainness. I did not buy a title company to get revenge on Paula Voss. I bought it because it was the cleanest lawful way to get to the truth in those files. A new owner has the right to audit every opinion the company ever issued, to pull the work papers behind a botched boundary certification, and to move to correct a defective instrument in the public record. I had savings from a lifetime of careful work. I had Diane's life insurance that I had never been able to bring myself to touch. And I had a banker named Phil who had known me for 20 years and who listened to the whole story across his desk, and then said, "Carl, that is either the smartest or the strangest thing you have ever asked me to fund." And then funded it. It took 4 months. In October of that second year, I closed on Hollowbrook, title and abstract, signed the papers myself, in the same building where I had signed 1,000 closings for other people. And the morning the deal funded, I owned the company whose stamp Paula Voss had been waving at me on my own gravel driveway. I want to slow down here because the way you find a thing matters as much as the thing. I did not march in and announce myself to the world. I told Ruth, and I told Tess, and I told no one else. And we let the lawsuit grind on while I quietly read the company's files from the inside. At night, the way I had read files my whole life. What I found in the work papers, behind the Cedar Hollow boundary opinion, turned my stomach and steadied my hands at the same time. The opinion had been drafted by a junior abstractor named Dana Kemp, and clipped to the back of it, in the working file the public never sees, was a handwritten note on a yellow sticky pad in a careful hand. The note said, "The original 1974 survey clearly placed the creek inside the Renner parcel. That the boundary as certified was not supported by the record, and that she had been instructed to certify it anyway." Instructed, the note said, by a phone call from the developer's office, and she had written the date of the call and the time. Dana Kemp had known the document was wrong, had said so in writing, in her own file, on the day she signed it, and had been overruled by a man who was not even in the building. I sat with that note in my hands at midnight in a strip mall office, and I did not feel triumph. I felt the particular tiredness of a man who has spent his life trusting paper and has just been reminded why some people stop. Then I did the disciplined thing. I did not use that note as a weapon the night I found it. I want you to notice that, because it is the whole discipline. A document used too early is a document wasted. I copied it, I photographed it in place, I backed it up to 2 drives, I logged the date and the hour, and I put the original back exactly where it sat, in the same paperclip, at the same angle. Then I did the boring, lawful, unglamorous thing. As the new owner of the company, I commissioned a fresh, independent boundary survey of the entire Cedar Hollow plat and the Renner parcel. performed by a licensed surveyor from 2 counties over, who had no connection to any party, and I ordered a full internal audit of every Cedar Hollow opinion the company had ever issued. I was not building a confrontation. I was building a record that a neutral authority could not argue with. The escalations did not stop while I worked. If anything, they got worse, because Paula Voss could feel the lawsuit slipping and did not know why. That is the thing about a person who never checks the facts. She could not understand why her certified document was not closing the case. So she pushed harder on the only lever she had, which was pressure. In November, with the first hard snow on the ground, she crossed the line that ended any sympathy a fair person might have had for her. Tess was home alone after school, doing homework at the kitchen table where I usually kept the folder. A crew of 3 men Greg Voss had hired showed up at my gate with bolt cutters and a chainsaw, claiming they had authorization to remove the disputed fence and to clear, in their words, the overgrowth on the community side of the creek. Diane's walnut trees were on the community side of the creek. In their telling, Tess called me, and her voice was not the voice of a 16-year-old who teases her father about a binder. It was small and fast and high. Dad, there are men. At the gate, they have a chainsaw and they say they are coming in. I was 40 minutes out on the highway with a load of fence wire in the bed. I kept my voice level because she needed level. Lock the house, I said. Both doors. Stay inside. Do not open the gate for anyone. Do you have your phone charged? She said she did. Then go to your window, the one over the trees, and start recording. Do not go outside. Just film. I am coming. I called Doyle's cell the second I hung up, and I called Ruth. And then I drove faster than I should have on a snowy road. Both hands on the wheel, and my heart going like a hammer the whole way, picturing my daughter at that window above her mother's trees. Tess did everything right. She locked the doors. She stood at her bedroom window above the walnut trees, and she recorded 4 minutes of 3 men in coveralls arguing with each other at a locked gate, one of them gesturing at the trees with the chainsaw still in his hand, while a deputy's truck came up the gravel road behind them with its lights turning. No tree was cut. No fence was touched. The men could not produce the written authorization Doyle asked them for, because no such authorization existed, and they left, fast, in 2 pickups. But for 40 minutes, my daughter sat alone in the house her mother chose, watching strangers with a chainsaw stand under her mother's trees, and that is the moment I stopped thinking of this as a property dispute. When I finally came up the drive, she was on the porch in her coat, phone still in her hand, and she did not cry until she saw my face. That footage went on 2 drives that night. Tess labeled them herself, in her own neat hand, with the date and the time. She did not tease me about the binder ever again. She started asking what went in it. The trespass with the chainsaw was the final step of the staircase, and it was the one that crossed cleanly into the law. Hired men with cutting tools, attempting to enter posted private property and destroy a lawful fence and protected trees on the strength of a fake authorization, while a minor was home alone. Ruth amended our case from a simple defense into a counterclaim, and she did it the week my independent survey came back. The new survey, performed by a neutral licensed professional, confirmed the 1974 line down to the inch. The creek, the walnut trees, the pasture, all of it sat squarely inside the Renner parcel, exactly as my deed said, exactly as Dana Kemp's suppressed note said, and nowhere near the association's plat. We now had 2 independent surveys, a recorded deed, a chain of title I had read myself, the fake inspector recording, $11,000 of fraudulent fines logged and photographed, the trespass footage, and sitting in my own company's files where I had every legal right to it. A handwritten admission that the document the whole scheme rested on was knowingly false. The hearing was set for a Tuesday morning in March in the County Commission chambers because the matter had grown past a simple civil suit into a question of a fraudulent instrument in the public record, and the county recorder and county council both had an interest in being present. The room was not large. There were folding chairs and a long table at the front, and a microphone that whined when anyone leaned too close to it. I got there early, the way I get everywhere early, and I sat in the second row with my one folder on my knee and watched the room fill. Deputy Doyle came in and took a seat against the back wall, off-duty in a flannel shirt, there on his own time, and gave me a small nod. Tess sat beside me. She had asked to come, and I had said yes, because she had earned the right to see the end of it. Paula Voss came in a magenta blazer and pearls, with the association's lawyer beside her in a gray suit and Greg Voss in the second row across the aisle in a good wool coat, checking his phone. She still thought she was going to win. She had her certified boundary opinion in a leather portfolio, the Hollowbrook stamp embossed on the cover page, and she set it on the table in front of her and squared its edges like a woman laying down a winning hand. When she caught me looking, she leaned to her lawyer and said something, and then she said, just loud enough to carry, the third time I would hear the shape of it, "This is the gentleman who thinks the creek belongs to him." A few people looked. I did not answer. I had stopped answering her a long time before. I had one folder. It was manila, and it was soft, at the corners from 2 years of handling, and Tess had drawn a small walnut leaf on the tab and pen one night, without telling me. Ruth laid the case out in flat, unhurried order, the way you stack stones for a wall. The deed, certified. The original 1974 survey, certified. Certified. The subdivision plat, certified. Its legal description opening and closing east of the creek and never once crossing the water. She set each one on the table, named it, and slid it to the clerk. Then she did the thing I had waited 2 years and one company purchased to do lawfully. She entered into the record the independent boundary survey, completed 3 weeks earlier by a licensed surveyor with no tie to any party, and she laid beside it the internal work papers of Hollowbrook title and abstract, including the certified opinion and the handwritten note that had been clipped to its back. She asked that the note be read into the record. County counsel, a careful man with reading glasses, who had said almost nothing all morning, took the page. He read it silently first. Then he took off his glasses and he read it aloud, slowly, so that every word landed in that quiet room. The note said the certified boundary was not supported by the original survey, that the creek lay inside the Renner parcel, and that the abstractor had been instructed to certify it anyway, with the date and time of the call written in the corner. The room went very still. The microphone whined once, and then was quiet. Paula Voss looked at the leather portfolio in front of her, the one with her winning hand inside it. And then she looked across the aisle at her husband, who had put his phone face down on his knee, and was no longer looking at anyone. Then she looked at me. For the first time in 2 years, she did not have a sentence ready. Her mouth opened, and nothing came out of it. I held her gaze for a moment, and then I looked down at the leaf my daughter had drawn on the folder, because the document was speaking now, and I did not need to. The county recorder asked a single question into the silence. He asked who currently owned Hollowbrook title and abstract, the company whose certified opinion the association had relied upon. Ruth answered that the company had changed hands the previous October, and that the current owner had authorized the release of the complete and unaltered work file in the interest of correcting the public record. The recorder asked the owner's name. I stood up. My knees were not as steady as I would have liked, but my voice was. I said, "My name, Carl Renner," and I said that I had bought the company, that I had audited its files, and that I had found a certification its own abstractor had documented as false on the day she signed it. I did not point at anyone. I sat back down. The whole thing took maybe 40 seconds, and it was the quietest 40 seconds of my life. Here are the two numbers I want you to hold side by side, because they are the whole story. In 2 years, the association had filed against me $11,400 in fines and collected exactly 0 of them. And the boundary that proved every one of those fines was issued without authority had been recorded in the county's own books in 1974, 50 years before Paula Voss decided. My walnut trees were part of her community. Her newest piece of paper was wrong. My oldest piece of paper was right. That is the gap. That was always the gap. The collapse did not need a speech, and it did not get one. County Council moved to strike the Hollabrook boundary opinion from the public record as a fraudulent instrument, and to refer the matter of the false certification and the instructed call to the state for review. The judge in our civil case, once the survey and the work file were before her, dismissed the association suit with prejudice, voided the lien on my home in a single line, and let our counterclaim for the trespass and the fraudulent fines proceed. The lien that had started everything, the one Paula Voss read off her clipboard on my driveway, was gone by the end of that week, struck from the title of my home as if it had never been written, which, legally, it should never have been. The consequences fell exactly where the overreach had pointed, which is the way these things go when the record is clean. Greg Voss's development company had borrowed against the next phase of Cedar Hollow on the strength of those Creekview lots, and those lots depended on the boundary that had just been struck as fraudulent. When the survey corrected the line, the creek and its wooded west bank were confirmed as mine, the amenity the loan was built on evaporated, and the financing for the phase collapsed within the month. The association's insurer, facing a fraud finding and our counterclaim, settled the trespass and the fines. Rather than go to trial, and the settlement covered Ruth's fees, the cost of the survey, and a sum for the 2 years besides. Paula Voss resigned the presidency she had held for 9 years before the next association meeting, because the board, once it saw the file, did not want her name on its letterhead. The state opened a review of the false certification, and Hollabrook title and abstract, under my ownership, reissued every Cedar Hollow opinion correctly and notified every affected owner, which is the only part of all of it that I am actually proud of, because somewhere in that subdivision were people who had bought homes on bad paper and never knew it. I kept the company about a year, long enough to clean the files and hand it to 2 younger abstractors who wanted to run it right, Dana Kemp among them, because a person who writes the truth in a file even when she is overruled is exactly the person you want holding the stamp. Then I came home for good. Tess is the part I want to end on, not the lawsuit. The spring after the hearing she turned 18, and on a warm evening she walked out to the back of the property with me to the stand of black walnut her mother had picked the place for. The trees 3 men had come with a chainsaw to take. They were leafing out. She put her hand on the biggest trunk, the one Diane used to lean against, and she said, "Mom would have liked how boring you were about all this." I told her boring was the whole plan. She laughed, and the creek ran behind us where it had run for longer than the subdivision had existed, on my side of the line, where the deed said it was. So here is the lesson, plain, the way I would tell it to a neighbor over a fence. Your land is defended by what is recorded, not by who shouts loudest at your gate. Go to the county recorder and pull your own deed and the plat next to it, and read them yourself, and know where your line actually is before anyone tells you where they think it is. Keep a folder, date everything. Photograph the postmarks, log every contact, save the recordings to 2 places, and never answer a piece of paper with your temper when you can answer it with a better piece of paper. A claim is loud and new. A clean chain of title is quiet and old. And old and quiet wins every time, in the only room where it counts. You do not need to buy a company to be right. I had the deed before I had the company. The company only let me put the truth where everyone could finally see it. If you have stood on your own ground, holding a notice you did not deserve, tell me about it in the comments because I read them. And somebody else who is scared right now needs to hear that the older, cleaner paper wins. Subscribe if you want to stay for the next one. Next time, a retired county surveyor watches an HOA pave a private road straight across an easement her own grandfather recorded in 1951, and learns the hard way that you should always check who signed the map before you pour the concrete. I will see you then. Keep your folder current.